Good evening. It's Friday, May 24th. My name is Leandra Bernstein, and you're watching our regular Friday evening live webcast with Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. Tonight we will be following a different format than what we usually do. We have two questioners in the studio this evening, Cody Jones and Dennis Mason. Lyndon LaRouche will be giving some opening remarks, and I will be following up with some supplementary material to his opening remarks. So without further ado, we present Mr. Lyndon LaRouche.
Yes. Well, thank you. We are in the most dangerous crisis in modern history in terms of both the world and the United States. This requires some consideration of the difficulties we're getting into here, that since the assassination of John F. Kennedy as president, the United States has actually been on a track of decline. Now, this decline has taken various forms. John F. Kennedy's extinction, which is probably a way of putting it, led into a major war which had never been fought at all. MacArthur insisted that was a foolish war, should never start at all, and warned that. And he was right. And this went on from the middle of the decade into the beginning of the next decade. Now, that masks things because there was war activity in terms of money activity, and so forth. So it appeared in some respects that the United States economy was actually recovering from what had happened by the launching of the war. It was not true. It became obvious of that. It was an effort to save the situation by launching an SDI, which was my particular initiative in this case. Had that actually succeeded, we would have escaped the pattern of downslide which the United States has been in, and other countries as well, since that time. The failure to go through with the SDI should have been done because of Bush and other British entities, that we went on a slide down all the way. We had another Bush in, George H.W. Bush. And then we had Bill Clinton, who was not so bad as a president. He made a few mistakes. But he was a serious person and tried to do some things about the economy. For that he has to get credit. But after that we had two Bushes, and this Bush was not very good on the brains department. And then we had the following thing of this character now. Now, the result has been that there has been a general long-term decline in the U.S. economy. Some people will say contrary. They say, no, there's a lot more money around. But money is not a measure of productivity, nor is it a measure of wealth. Money is just money. And since the Jackson administration in the United States earlier, which was a very bad period for the United States, the United States has been in the hands of swindlers, bankers who are nothing but swindlers. And the swindlers control us. From the time of Jackson's excess to the presidency, the United States was going downhill with the slave system and everything else, and the bankers. And the British bankers who populated New York City and Boston, but especially the New York City area, were destroying the United States all the way through. Lincoln, in the war that was forced upon him, did two things. He did what he should have done, and he had the guts to do it. He beat the British with his brains, not with the guns. And then we progressed for a while with a great recovery of the United States coming out of that Civil War. We came back to ourselves. But then again and again, the New York bankers, the British bankers, and so forth came in. We went through another First World War we should never have fought. We had no business going into it. Then we went into a Second World War. Roosevelt saved the United States, except he couldn't save it when he was dead. And therefore, before the actual invasion of Europe by the Allied forces to free Europe occurred, we were already spinning down again. And Truman was as much a disaster as anything else. The man was no damn good, plain and simple. All right, so we've come into this situation now. It's worse and worse and worse. The morality is almost non-existent. The quality of work done by the American population as employed in activities, terrible. If you take out the British banking stuff and things related to that, the United States has been in the worst decay of its life since that time, since the time that young Bush came into government. So now we've reached a point where we have actually killed our own ability to produce. We can no longer produce. The western states, especially the Great Plains states, the great crop growing area, have been destroyed. California, Southern California, all of California destroyed relative to what it had been before. And so throughout the United States, the population, the incomes, the number of people who are actually doing work, real work, is diminishing as a percentile. We're overwhelmed by British bankers and their masses who serve them. Now we come under the influence of a British queen whose policies curiously coincide with the trends of today. She has prescribed the destruction of the productive powers of the United States, productive powers of all nations generally. The productivity, the people who are employed in actual productivity, producing services that are essential, producing in what we call production. The quality of production, the quantity of production out of the total population is such. We're being destroyed. What they've added to that under Obama, a special kind of hyperinflation. This nation is bankrupt, hopelessly bankrupt. The only way we could save this nation is by actually throwing these guys out of office, the people who represent this out of office, and throw most of this combination of actually British bankers. Most of the bankers we have are either at the top are British bankers, and as they have been ever since Jackson, since President Jackson. We are, as a patriotic nation, we've got a very low score. We have bankers, we don't have patriots. We cut down on the number of patriots to increase the number of bankers. The banking system itself is now in the greatest hyperinflation the world has ever known. No hyperinflation has ever matched that has gone on in the United States. That's all worthless money. Now, what these guys plan to do is to take the worthless money and collect on it against the nation, the people in the nation of the United States. What is against us is mass murder, and the Queen is responsible. The Queen of England is responsible. She is the one who insisted on this kind of program, to cut down productivity and to lower the population of the planet, to reduce the population of the planet rapidly from 7 billion people to about 1. That process is occurring. And one of the great contributors to that process is a particular firm, shall we say, Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank is the worst enemy of the American people I can think of right now. They are the key figures being used by the British monarchy to collapse the U.S. economy on itself and to drive down the population level of the U.S. population by methods of starvation and similar kinds of things. This is what we face. We face a nation of weak-minded leaders who will steal anything. We have bankers, always British, always bankers, always British, who have ruined us. We no longer have our industry. It was taken away. Our agriculture is destroyed. We can no longer produce to our own needs. We can no longer produce the infrastructure we require. All these things have been taken from us by those British bums who have controlled Wall Street since the time that Andrew Jackson became President of the United States. The time has now come for us to refuse to swallow the kind of deal that those two crooks want to impose upon us. You know, our dear old crooks, Dodd and Frank. Barney Frank, old Barney Frank, and Daughtery Dodd. And these two creeps are supposed to take over a situation to rob you and effectively to bury you, or to cause somebody else to have to bury you. And that's where we are now. The point is, we've got to stand up on our hind legs and, for a change, realize that we have been swindled. And we know how many members of the Congress are going along with the swindle. Go along to get along. The swindle. The go along to get along swindle. It's tantamount to treason. And the members of Congress better wake up to that fact.
All right, thank you very much for your opening remarks. At this point in the webcast, I'd like to present some supplementary material to what Mr. LaRouche just stated on the case of Dodd-Frank. Now, on this broadcast and many other broadcasts that LaRouche has done in the past, we've made a number of jokes about Dodd-Frank. I'm personally culpable for making plenty of jokes at Barney Frank's expense. There's only one problem with the jokes, given the seriousness of the facts. They're not very funny. So what we have in the Congress currently, there have been a number of hearings to look into what was done with the passage of Dodd-Frank when President Obama signed it into law July 21st, 2010. There have been hearings to investigate what happened in meetings that have been conducted by LaRouche PAC activists, LaRouche PAC organizers. There have been Congress people who have said, let's give Dodd-Frank some more time to work. There are people who are still calling Dodd-Frank a piece of regulation, or a piece of, or saying that it doesn't go far enough. And I'd say that Dodd-Frank goes plenty far. The Dodd-Frank Act of 2010, among other things, codifies a bail-in. It ensures that the United States can conduct the type of bail-in that we saw in Cyprus in March, the end of March of this year. In the language of the preamble of Dodd-Frank, it claims to protect the American taxpayer by ending bailouts. That is done by implementing bail-in. Title II of Dodd-Frank establishes what's called the Orderly Liquidation Authority, which is an authority given to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, to essentially recapitalize a failed GSIFI, a globally significant financial institution. In the event of a failure, the orderly liquidation authority kicks in and enables the resolution of cross-border firms in the language of a document published by the FDIC and the Bank of England in December 2012. The resolution strategies, which are in the Orderly Liquidation Authority, are designed to enable large and complex cross-border firms to be resolved without threatening financial stability and without putting public funds at risk. In the U.S., a strategy has been developed in the context of the powers provided by the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010. Such a strategy would apply a single receivership at the top-tier holding company, assign losses to shareholders and unsecured creditors of the holding company, and transfer sound operating subsidiaries to a new solvent entity or entities. In Dodd-Frank, that entity provisions are provided for the creation of that entity, a bridge financial company. That bridge financial company is then capitalized through the bailing in of that financial institution, namely the unsecured creditors, and also anyone who has investments in that company. Now, on the issue of unsecured creditors, the language of Dodd-Frank states explicitly that the I'm sorry, I'm getting my quotes a little mixed up here. But in the language of Dodd-Frank, they wish to ensure that unsecured creditors bear the losses. This as opposed to having taxpayers bear the losses. And this is done either by taking a write-down, or the unsecured creditors are they are converted into stockholders of this new firm. Now, this was done in the case of the Bankia restructuring earlier this year in March in Spain, which we have covered on the website. And I'll point out again, this Bank of England FDIC joint report states that to capitalize the new operations, one or more new private entities, through one or new private entities, the FDIC expects that it will have to look to subordinated debt or even senior unsecured debt claims as the immediate source of capital. The original debt holders can thus expect that their claims will be written down to reflect any losses in the receivership of the parent that the shareholders cannot cover. Now, next, I'd like to take up the issue of the international framework, because Dodd-Frank was not, just as the Cyprus case was not singular to the country of Cyprus, Dodd-Frank is not just legislation on the books of the United States. But in 2009, at the London G20 summit, the first summit that President Barack Obama ever attended, it was agreed upon that there would be a G20 framework for cross-border bank resolution. And this would be done under the guidance of the Financial Stability Board, which was established in 2009, and there are provisions for cross-border resolution, which in reading it are virtually identical to the language. The language is virtually identical to that of the almost 1,000-page Dodd-Frank bill. But in the language of their document, key attributes of effective resolution regimes for financial institutions, published on October 2011, they recommend at the outset of the report that in order to facilitate the coordinated resolution of firms active in multiple countries, jurisdictions should seek convergence of their resolution regimes through to facilitate the coordinated resolution of firms, they should seek convergence of their resolution regimes through the legislative changes needed to incorporate the tools and powers set out in the document into their national regimes. Now, again, the Financial Stability Board represents the G20 nations in addition to a handful of other nations and other organizations, including ECB, IMF, the infamous Troika, et al. Now, the report goes on to state that these coordinated bail-in regimes, of which Dodd-Frank is the U.S. incarnation, this resolution authority should have resolution powers over local branches of foreign firms, and the capacity to use its powers either to support a resolution carried out by a foreign home authority, or, in exceptional cases, to take measures on its own initiative where the home jurisdiction is not taking action or acts in a manner that does not take sufficient account of the need to preserve the local jurisdiction's financial stability. So, essentially, you're looking at an international bail-in regime with these powers, and to conduct cross-border resolution, cross-border bail-in. For example, the United States, we have large exposure to banks in the United Kingdom. If the bail-in mechanism were to be triggered in the United Kingdom, that would directly affect us. If they were to trigger that as opposed to the United States triggering that, then we would be sucked into bail-in as under the provisions of Dodd-Frank at the behest of the triggering of the bail-in mechanism by the United Kingdom. Again, that's a hypothetical, but it's a likely hypothetical. Now, the final point that I'd like to make is the issue of the difference between the orderly liquidation authority and bankruptcy, because the two are very different, even despite what has been done with bankruptcy laws in the United States since the 2005 rewriting of bankruptcy laws. But the Cornell University Legal Information Institute wrote that Title II of Dodd-Frank is aimed at ensuring that payout to claimants is at least as much as a claimants would have received under bankruptcy liquidation. The only problem with that is that liquidation during resolution is done at the discretion of the receiver, which in this case is the FDIC, and it's done on the basis of salvaging what, in the view of the receiver, is most critical to financial stability. So that trumps what are laid out in Dodd-Frank as the order of operations in bankruptcy, financial stability over everything. Now, as we know from the current financial system, the banks that would be subject to cross-border resolutions are highly leveraged, wildly undercapitalized, and they rely on classes of what they call assets, which are in the forms of, for example, derivatives, CDOs, other contracts, whose value, where the propping up of the value of those contracts amount to the appearance of stability, or in the bank's case, solvency. Now, we're talking about orderly liquidation as opposed to disorderly liquidation. If you were to create uncertainty in the value of any category of these assets, you would trigger disorderly liquidation, which is not what this bail-in regime, what Dodd-Frank, what the FSB was established to do. Now, in an IMF report titled "From Bailout to Bail-In," disorderly liquidation can create risks to overall financial stability through direct counterparty risks, through liquidity risks, and through contagion risks. So, the only way these three risks are to be avoided is to prop up the nominal value of those things, which would, in the case of uncertainty, trigger these three risks. And as is stated in Dodd-Frank, as is stated in each of these internationally drafted reports, financial stability is the most important aspect. Now, this is going to be published in a report for the website, so there's a lot more that will be coming as documentation. But what is most essential, especially when we take into account the international scope of the bail-in regime and how it has been stuck into the side of the United States by Barack Obama, Dodd-Frank, and Barney Frank, and Chris Dodd. Glass-Steagall, if implemented as an act of the United States, an act of the sovereignty of the United States, would effectively override Dodd-Frank. It would override this bail-in regime as soon as it is implemented. So this is, in part, what is at stake, and I've largely taken their own words, because I'd like to present in their own words what the program is. And so with that, I would like you to I'd like to hear your remarks concerning what this means.
What this means is the destruction of the United States, and it means implicitly the reduction of the population of the United States by a special kind of genocide. That means that the unwanted eaters, the useless eaters, will be eliminated. It will be eliminated in many ways. They are farmers. Bankrupt them. They die. Employees. They die. Because everything is reduced to fit these parameters. And there's not enough room in the system, economic room in the system, to sustain the existing population. This is the British Queen's policy, her stated policy. And you see it written in Dodd-Frank. So therefore the authors of Dodd-Frank have to be treated as fools or worse. That's the issue. Are you going to defend your own life? Are you going to prevent a reduction by, I say, 2/3 or more of the population of the United States by economic means? Are you going to do that? Or are you going to throw Dodd-Frank out of here? Because there's an institution in the United States that can overrule all of this. The U.S. Supreme Court. the supremacy of the United States. And I think it's fair to use the following language. We're going to bankrupt those bastards.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, if you're just joining us, this is our regular Friday live webcast, and we've heard remarks from Mr. LaRouche, and we're now going to move on to the question and answer period, and I'd like Cody Jones to come up and ask the first question.
All right, good evening. So our first question comes from a group of institutional contacts who have a question about someone who himself should be institutionalized. So they say, Mr. LaRouche, this week, President Obama faced new revelations on a number of scandals that could lead to his impeachment. In addition to the Associated Press, it was revealed that the Justice Department was also tracking the phone records of Fox News reporters. There are new whistleblowers coming forward on the Benghazi 9/11 story, and Rep. Darrell Issa now, for the first time, appears to have the support of the Republican House leadership to move forward with that investigation. We would like to ask about the scandal involving political targeting by the Internal Revenue Service, a scandal that has already reached the White House as the result of new revelations that the President's General Counsel had a series of meetings with the General Counsel of the IRS. The behavior of the IRS impacts on every American household. Now, as accusations of political targeting of Obama opponents gains traction, the IRS is about to assume far greater power in overseeing the implementation of Obamacare. And just as a note, they've assembled a task force of over 2,100 employees at the IRS whose job will be the implementation and policing of Obamacare. And to put the cherry on top of it, Sarah Hall Ingram, who was actually the commissioner of the tax-exempt unit at the IRS during this scandal period, is the one who will actually be in charge of overseeing the Obamacare operations at the IRS. So they say, it is perhaps the greatest expansion of IRS power and personnel in decades. How do you assess these new unfolding revelations surrounding the president and his team?
Well, let's talk about the Congress, for example. It's a good thing to talk about at this time. Now, the members of Congress, I must say, I have respect in some things for them, many of them, but not on this account. They are acting like damned fools in assuming that their privileges as members of the Congress somehow mean that they have to give in to this sort of legislation. And this is the point. Are you willing, and we're going to have to confront the members of the Congress in particular with their guilt on this point. Are they going to assist in legislation and other measures which will cause accelerated death rates of our own population in the United States on a massive scale? Therefore, the Congress has got to stop being the towel boy for Wall Street and Britain. The point is that people have got to stand up and say no. And we have authorities, there are authorities which are greater than any of those that you've mentioned so far inside the United States. The Constitution of the United States, for example. The powers of the Supreme Court. All of this garbage can be eliminated quite peacefully, but riotously, of course, by just those measures. The Congress has got to find its honesty and its guts. And the people who they serve should enforce that on those members of the Congress. Stop being asses. You've got to hold up to the U.S. Constitution in its original intention. You've got to understand the lessons of its intention in the history of this nation. We are not subject to a European policy. We created a United States to escape from Europe's policies. That was from the beginning. It was the essence of the Massachusetts Bay Colony operation. And the renewal of that, all the struggle to establish the U.S. Constitution was that. We do not submit to foreign agreements, entanglements with foreign powers. And on that basis, Glass-Steagall prevails. And Obama and his friends are canceled. It's a violation of our Constitution in the very deepest matters of principle. No one can come into this United States and say because they've made a treaty, a crooked treaty, with a bunch of crooks in New York City and a bunch of crooks in London and in Manhattan and whatnot, they can't come into us and say they are going to create and enforce a provision on our nation which is contrary to the intention of our Constitution. It's an alien conception. We try to be friendly with European nations as that. But on this matter, no. This is our United States. And these fellows better get themselves out of our United States pretty quick, because you're going to get some very angry American citizens demanding that happen. But our Constitution, our legacy, demands that. We are enforced by our commitment, our oath of citizenship. We are forced to reject and overthrow the provisions of this bunch of crooks.
Okay. Well, I have a question about keeping up the courage under fire on this question of Glass-Steagall particularly. We now have the text of the Glass-Steagall bill that Harkin has introduced in the United States Senate, which is S-985, which is very close to the text of the House bill, H.R. 129. So this is the type of legislation which is designed to not be bogged down in terms of consolidation should it be passed by both houses of Congress. And this is the single most feared and most powerful blow to this financial empire, which is behind what Leandra was describing in her section of this broadcast. Now, with the continued scandals around the targeting of the media, with the AP and the Fox phone lines, there's been reports of a CBS reporter's computer being compromised, and now with the IRS targeting of political groups, as Cody had mentioned. Apparently, over the course of that, one guy was audited 4 different times by the IRS. These have certain real-world consequences in that we're finding that in the organizing on the streets and also in the institutions, we've picked up a certain hesitancy or a sort of political stuttering from fear. There's been some discussion in our extended network as to questioning as to, well, what will the enemy do? How will the empire react to the fact that their doom is on the table with this bill sitting in the U.S. Congress ready to go? Now, in discussions yesterday, you stated in no uncertain terms that the mode of operation here is to go on the offensive. In particular, if it's not Glass-Steagall, it needs to be destroyed. So the question that I pose to you is, on this question of keeping up the courage under fire, we know that the bastards are going to fight back. This is a war. It's not debaters' points. It's not a game. We've seen it increasingly in the streets. We saw it in 2010 when Glass-Steagall was in the Senate then. But unlike 2010, we've mobilized the better part of the nation to see this through. And over the course of the entire fight, you've reiterated that the policy question is the less difficult aspect. It's the matter of guts. So if you could speak to this question of keeping up the courage under fire, because we've got to win this fight.
Well, it's known and it's in our history that when it comes to a fight, most Americans are cowards, unless it's a personal fight, which that usually comes off rather easily. But if it's a serious fight, they will walk away from it if they can. And therefore, the quality of leadership, which is not just limited to people who are established leaders or leaders by profession in some other sense, but it's the fact that there are a few people who have the guts, shall we say, and the understanding at the same time. The two are essential. You can't have guts without understanding, and you can't have understanding without guts. Both true. And therefore, the question is leadership. And what the first thing, like Obama has done, Obama is a tyrant of the worst type. There's nothing about him that is anything but tyrant. He's a killer, he's a murderer, and he's a tyrant in general. And he's also an agent, in fact, of a foreign power. Therefore, he should be thrown out of office, and there are many, many, many good reasons for heaving him out the office. I don't think we want to throw him out the window. We don't want to leave that kind of blood on the streets, but we throw him out of office anyway. He's overdue for expulsion, and he was nothing but a British tool anyway. So that's where we stand. It's a matter of leadership, and it often means in real political efforts, you've got to get some guts into your best friend. And that's the key issue here. Most people will duck it. No, last minute. No. You say, John, get your guts together. We're going to fight. And that's what's needed now. A lot of our good old Americans who just don't want to do that, but now they know they do. Look for save the food supply. Just take that. Just think about the starvation that's occurring throughout the United States through food shortages, which are created by the Bush and Obama administration in particular. Are you going to stand up and take that? We have less food than we ever had before. The quality of the food is poorer. The incomes of the farmer are poorer. And these fat cats of Wall Street are demanding the right to eat everybody. Well, if we Americans have any guts left, that ain't going to happen. And that's the way to look at it.
Okay. Shift gears just a little bit. I have a particular question that's come in from Yemen, but I want to give it just a little bit of context. Now, in the Senate, on the one hand, we do have the Glass-Steagall bill that's been introduced. On the other hand, yesterday we had 99 senators vote to back Israel on the question of a conflict with Iran. Some of the text of that bill said that if the government of Israel is compelled to take military action in legitimate self-defense against Iran's nuclear weapons program, the United States government should stand with Israel and provide, in accordance with United States law and the constitutional responsibility of Congress, to authorize the use of military force, diplomatic, military, and economic support to the government of Israel in its defense of its territory, people, and existence. So that overwhelmingly passed. Now, in response, Jamal Abdi, who is the policy director of the National Iranian American Council, in a statement, he had said, well, apparently the Senate thinks the standoff between the United States and Iran suffers from a lack of brinksmanship. Washington and Tehran are stuck in a vicious cycle of mutual escalation that can only be broken through the give and take of serious negotiations, not through further saber rattling. He went on and called on Congress to abstain from any more reckless threats or sanctions that push us closer to the brink of war with Iran. Instead, Congress should ensure diplomacy can succeed by making it absolutely clear and credible that in exchange for verifiable concessions that prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, sanctions will be lifted. So we have this ramping up of the conflict on the Iranian front. Now, a very short while ago, Israel struck Syria, which had the potential to blow up there into a large war, particularly concerning Russia. Now, as regards Russia, there was a conference. There's a conference on European security, which was titled "Military and Political Aspects of European Security," which brought together officials from Russia, Europe, the United States, and Canada. And there, the chief of the General Staff of Russia, General Valery Gerasimov, he warned that the U.S. policy is standing in the way of further reductions in nuclear arms. He said that Russia will cut its strategic attack force only when it is certain that the United States' development of global missile defense will not undermine its nuclear deterrent potential. And then he went on to say that we have devised a new system for counteracting the possible negative effect of the United States global shield that it may have on the Russian nuclear potential, and we're not going to hush it up. So in this context of the potential for a broader war to break out, Barack Obama gave us a terrorism speech yesterday at the National Defense University, and he made no bones about the fact that, you know, he's killed American citizens with drone strikes because the nation is in a state of war, and we have to use all means to defend ourselves. Now, to cut to the chase, to get to the question particularly, in the broader context of general war, we have a specific question from a representative of the government of Yemen, which has been constantly marauded by the drone strikes and have a contingent of people being held indefinitely at Guantanamo Bay. And he asks, where do you stand from the Guantanamo prison issue and the open drone strategy of Barack Obama? Many regards, sir.
Well, first of all, you can brush all that aside. It's very simple. If you start to fool around with this kind of thing, you're going to wander into a global thermonuclear war from which probably no one can survive. So these petty schemes, forget them. Forget them. And forget the fools that babble them out. As General Dempsey has emphasized, and others have emphasized, we know that if there is general warfare or anything leading into general warfare in any of these regions, there may not be any people left later. So therefore, just cut out all those issues. They're not worth considering. They're the mutual extinction of all the fools that connive at them. Our job is to prevent fools like the fools who are doddering fools we just referred to earlier. There are certain things that we must insist happen, as opposed to certain things that we must insist will not happen. And that's what this is all about. We're not talking about balancing or measuring grievances on one side or the other. The time is gone for that. War, by involving major nations, war is thermonuclear war. And thermonuclear war is one that the human species is unlikely to survive. Now, there's some people who want to play that game, but they're idiots and worse. They are criminals in any sense. Anyone who's out there to start and pull the button, push the button on thermonuclear war, is a criminal beyond belief. So these things are irrelevant. And the important thing is the Russian intervention has occurred in the negotiations on this matter, is move in, deal with the responsible people in the United States, which don't include the president, move in and stop it right now. We're going to force negotiations. And we're going to force them not among a group of nations, we're going to force them nation by nation. You will not do it. You will not start this war. You will not detonate this dynamite. You won't do it. We will refuse to let you do that. And that's the theme. We want to save the human species, and anybody else who wants to play a contrary game should be put someplace where they can do no harm.
Okay, so now we'd like to take a look at the physical side of the economic crisis and address what I like to think of as the three prongs of the devil's pitchfork, which are now threatening to kill, literally through starvation and dehydration, billions of people on this planet. Those three prongs being, one, the the disinvestment that's been going on for the greater part of the last 50 years in things like physical infrastructure, which we've seen, the American Society of Civil Engineers have repeatedly in their report cards given U.S. infrastructure a D-, with water infrastructure often getting the lowest grade possible. The second of these prongs being speculation, the role of speculation in food. There was a report that now on the Chicago Wheat Board, 61% of all trades are done purely for the intention of speculation on food prices. Whereas even back in '96, before the reversal of Glass-Steagall, it was only 12%. Now we're up to 61%, led by, of all entities, Goldman Sachs. In that context, the World Bank in 2010 had said that 44 million people have been driven into poverty solely because of the speculative increases in food. Now, the third of those prongs, which they all kind of work in a dynamic together, is the green ideology. As we know, greenism, in the name of environmentalism, has been responsible for stopping the development of numerous dams and other water projects. In addition, you have things like the mandate around ethanol, where now over 40% of the corn produced in the United States is mandated under Obama's diktat to go towards ethanol production. And this 5 billion bushels of corn, which is going towards ethanol, has been estimated could feed up to 412 million people. So you've got a serious crisis, and it should be known Arthur Daniels Midland is actually the largest producer of corn for ethanol production. So it gives you a sense of the kind of entities behind this. Now, we currently find ourselves in a position where 48% of the contiguous United States is now in drought. 65% of Mexico is in drought. This includes 11 of the 17 western states of the United States. Now, of those, California is in a situation where for January and February of this year, they have the driest months on record. Since they've been keeping records in California, January and February have been the driest on record. So obviously we're facing a severe crisis with water, with food. The problem is that the solutions, to the extent any are being put forward, tend to be of the type of trying to accommodate to the crisis. Is there a way we can figure out to do dry farming, etc.? The idea that has traditionally driven man, the idea of the noosphere having dominion over the biosphere, the idea that we engage in what we've talked about as biospheric engineering, that's been lost because of just a general collapse in scientific thinking and just overall corruption. So I was wondering if you could address both, one, what is the intention that's behind that which has led us to this point of crisis, but probably most importantly, give us a sense of a way forward. What should be the policy moving forward?
Okay. Well, there are two sides to this thing. One is we should reduce the percentile of the population, that is of the level of population, which is involved in Wall Street and similar operations. We should demand that they be cancelled. Their employment is unnecessary. They are useless people, while we have useful people are not allowed to work or shut off from work. If we want to rebuild this nation and save it, we're going to have to shut down most of what's called Wall Street and most of the practices which coincide with Wall Street. They're on the streets, buddy. Now, I have a very humane way of doing that. The humane way is to simply take the obvious action. We simply will bankrupt that system, which is unnecessary, and we will take the resources, including all the resources that Wall Street wastes on its own privileges, and we will have to redirect forces into reconstructing a real economy, which means food, which means general development, it means health care, it means education, so forth and so on. If we start on a program, we say, well, all right, we put a tax on Wall Street, a tax that will extinguish most of them. and to force them to try to find something useful to do instead of what they do now. But that's the spirit. If we are determined to save, in particular, this nation, which is not being saved now, this nation is being destroyed by the people who govern it. There have to be some changes. Some people have to come to the, prayer table or something, confess their sins and change their ways. Now, we have been reducing the number of people producing food. We have destroyed the basis for producing of food, especially in the characteristic areas. We have failed to develop the water management systems which are necessary for such a program, and so forth and so on. Those of us who have some expertise, know this. We know exactly what to do. The problem is the situation has gone so far down now that even the best effort we have with the resources we have is really not in full conscience, is not what we owe to our own people. We're not producing the food. We're not giving them the kind of employment that will enable them to be productive. We're destroying our own people. And we're destroying it because we're kissing the butt of the British Queen. That's what the problem is. If we go about our business in our American tradition, we have probably enough to save a lot of lives. Just cancel Wall Street. If we don't have to pay off Wall Street, think of all the wealth we can divert into useful things. We don't need Wall Street. We don't need speculation. We can have an open market, which is a fair bargaining market. We don't need this crap. We don't need the expenditures that are on people's lives whose lives are not productive. They have pleasure, they have all this, but they don't produce anything except trouble. So the simply is a change in the understanding. We're not going to show respect for a fat lout in Wall Street to order to starve children in some other part of the United States. We're going back. We're going to go back and we're going to get rid of a lot of the green. Now there's some green that's good, but most of the green that's intended is malicious. It comes from the British, and it won't help anybody. So we should go back to a U.S. standard, a U.S. tradition of the great food-producing nation, the great water builder of water systems needed for that. All we need is a good government, and we have not got one now.
Well, that brings a conclusion to tonight's webcast. I want to thank you very much, Mr. LaRouche. Thank you, Cody. Thank you, Dennis. And to everyone watching, you can contact us, LaRouchePack.com/contact, and you can take this webcast as soon as it's archived and reposted on the website, repost it on your website, get it out to all of your networks, put it up everywhere, and we hope you will join us next week in our continuing series of live webcasts. Thank you very much.